The Vixari Empire had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 12,000 years. No species had ever defeated them. No species had ever come close. Their warriors stood 9 feet tall with scales harder than steel and claws that could tear through metal like paper. Their ships numbered in the thousands, and their weapons could burn entire continents to ash in minutes. Every civilization they had encountered had either surrendered or been destroyed. Most chose to surrender. The ones who fought back became examples for others. High Commander Zelthar sat on his throne aboard the flagship Devastator and reviewed the data his scouts had collected about the small blue planet called Earth. The inhabitants were soft and weak. They had no scales, no claws, no natural armor. Their bodies were fragile, and their lives were short. They had only recently discovered how to travel between stars, and their fleet was laughably small. Zelthar had conquered 11 species in his lifetime. This would be the 12th, and it would be the easiest. He ordered 47 warships to the Sol system. It was more than enough. It was probably too many. But Zelthar believed in overwhelming force. He believed in making examples. Captain Jack Morrison was 34 years old and had served in the United Earth Navy for 12 years. He commanded the reconnaissance vessel Starward with a crew of 18. Their job was simple: patrol the outer edges of the solar system and report anything unusual. For 3 years, nothing unusual had happened. Jack had started to think nothing ever would. Then the Vexari fleet appeared near Neptune. Jack was drinking coffee in the mess hall when the alarm started screaming. He ran to the bridge and found his crew staring at their screens in silence. Lieutenant Lisa Park turned to look at him, and her face was pale. 47 ships just dropped out of hyperspace, she said. Each one is bigger than anything we have. The smallest is twice the size of our largest battleship. Jack looked at the screen. The Vexari ships hung in space like a wall of death. They were black and angular and covered with weapons. He had never seen anything like them. No human had. "Are they hailing us?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Audio only. Play it." The voice that filled the bridge was deep and cold and spoke in perfect English. The Vexari had clearly been watching Earth for some time. "People of Earth, we are the Vexari Empire. We have ruled this region of space for 12,000 years. Every species we have encountered has submitted to our rule or been destroyed. You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, we will burn your planet and everyone on it. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. You have been warned." The message ended. The bridge was silent. Jack stood there for a long moment. He thought about his wife Susan and his daughter Emma back on Earth. He thought about the billions of people who had no idea what was coming. He thought about how small and fragile the Starward suddenly felt. Then he made a decision. "Lisa, get me a direct line to Earth Command. Priority 1. And start scanning those ships. I want to know everything about them. Shield frequencies, weapon types, hull composition. Anything you can find." Lisa looked at him like he was crazy. "Sir, if we get any closer, they might destroy us." "They might," Jack agreed. "But if we run away now, we learn nothing. And if we learn nothing, then Earth has no chance at all. So we stay, we watch, we learn, and we send everything we find back home." The Starward crept closer to the Vexari fleet over the next several hours. Jack expected to be destroyed at any moment, but the Vexari did nothing. Their ships just hung there in the darkness like patient predators. On the Devastator, High Commander Zelthar watched the tiny human vessel approach. One of his subordinates suggested destroying it. "Why?" Zelthar asked. "It is one small ship, with 18 creatures aboard. Let them look. Let them see what they face. It will make the fear greater when the time comes." This was how the Vexari thought. They had never faced an enemy who could learn from observation. They had never needed to worry about such things. Every species they had conquered had simply cowered and waited for death. The humans did not cower. Jack and his crew spent the next 70 hours studying the Vexari fleet. They mapped every ship. They analyzed every signal. They tested the edges of Vexari sensor range and noted how the aliens responded to different approaches. Lisa discovered that Vexari shields operated on rotating frequencies, and that there was a brief gap during each rotation. It was a tiny weakness, barely noticeable, but it was something. Meanwhile, on Earth, the governments of the world argued about what to do. Some wanted to surrender. They pointed out that humanity had no chance against such power. Fighting would only lead to total destruction. Others refused to accept this. General Maria Santos of the United Earth Defense Force stood before the World Council and made her case. "We do not know what surrender means to these creatures," she said. "We do not know if they will honor any agreement. What we do know is that they have conquered every species they have met. We know that some of those species chose to fight and some chose to submit, and we know that none of them are free today. Surrender may save our lives, but it will not save our future. Our children and grandchildren will be slaves. Is that what we want? Our mender? The debate continued for 2 days. In the end, it came down to a vote. The result was closer than anyone expected, but the decision was made. When the 72 hours ended, the Vexari received a transmission from Earth. It was 2 words long. "We decline." High Commander Zelthar read the message 3 times. He had conquered 11 species. He had heard begging and pleading and desperate offers of tribute. He had heard threats that meant nothing and promises that would never be kept. But he had never heard this. No species had ever simply declined. He did not know what to make of it. So he did what the Vexari always did when they did not understand something. He decided to destroy it. "Send word to the fleet," he commanded. "Begin the attack. Start with the Mars colony. We will show them what happens to those who refuse us." The Vexari ships began to move. The war had begun. On the starward, Jack watched the fleet advance toward Mars. He had done everything he could. He had sent every piece of data back to Earth. He had given humanity its first look at the enemy. Now all he could do was hope it would be enough. Mars colony was home to 20 million people. They lived in domed cities and underground tunnels carved into the red rock. They had built a new world from nothing, and they were proud of what they had created. The colony had schools and hospitals and parks with real trees growing under artificial sunlight. Children played in the streets and families gathered for meals, and life went on the way life always does when people are free and hopeful. Then the Vexari came. Commander Samantha Cole was 51 years old and had spent 30 years in the military. She had fought in 3 different conflicts on Earth before taking command of the Mars Colonial Defense Force. Her force consisted of 300 Marines and a collection of mining equipment that had never been designed for war. She had no warships. She had no orbital weapons. She had no way to stop the Vexari fleet from reaching the surface. What she had was experience and stubbornness, and a complete refusal to die without a fight. The Vexari sent 12,000 warriors to take Mars. High Commander Zelthar wanted to make an example. He wanted to show humanity what happened to those who resisted. He expected the attack to take a few hours at most. Samantha gathered her Marines in the main command bunker. They were scared. She could see it in their eyes. They had all seen the footage from the starward. They knew what the Vexari looked like and what those claws could do to human flesh. "I am not going to lie to you," Samantha said. "We cannot win this battle. We do not have the numbers or the weapons. Most of us are going to die here." She paused and looked at each of them in turn. "But dying is not the same as losing. The Vexari expect us to hide in bunkers and wait for death. They expect us to be easy prey. We are going to show them something different. We are going to make them pay for every tunnel and every room and every inch of ground. We are going to make this the most expensive victory they have ever won. And when people on Earth hear what we did here, they will know that the Vexari can be hurt. They will know that these monsters can bleed." The Marines said nothing. Then a young private named Danny Cruz raised his hand. "What do you need us to do, Commander?" Samantha smiled. "I need you to turn this colony into a death trap." Over the next 6 hours, the defenders of Mars worked without rest. They rigged the mining tunnels with explosives. They turned the ore haulers into armored vehicles with welded plates and mounted guns. They set up ambush points in every corridor and every junction. They flooded some sections with toxic gas and filled others with debris. They made the colony into a maze, where death waited around every corner. The Vexari landing ships touched down at dawn. The warriors poured out, expecting to find terrified civilians huddling in shelters. Instead, they found empty streets and locked doors and silence. The first Vexari squad entered Tunnel 7 and walked straight into a wall of gunfire. The humans had positioned themselves behind barricades made of mining carts and metal plates. They fired until their weapons overheated, and then they fell back to the next position. The Vexari were stronger and faster. Their scales could stop most bullets, and their claws could cut through the barricades like cardboard. But the tunnels were narrow and dark, and the humans knew every turn. The Vexari had to advance single file, and every step forward cost them lives. By the end of the first day, the Vexari had taken 3 tunnels. They had lost 800 warriors. The commander on the ground sent a message to High Commander Zelthar, reporting the unexpected resistance. Zelthar was confused. No prey species had ever fought like this. He ordered more troops to the surface. The battle continued for 6 more days. Samantha Cole fought alongside her Marines in every engagement. She led the defense of the agricultural dome when the Vexari broke through the eastern perimeter. She personally destroyed a Vexari transport with a mining explosive strapped to her back. When the ammunition ran low, she taught civilians how to make weapons from tools and chemicals found in the maintenance shops. The colonists fought too. Teachers and doctors and engineers picked up weapons and stood beside the Marines. An old woman named Betty Palmer held a corridor for 4 hours with nothing but a shotgun and a handful of shells. A teenager named Marcus Webb crashed a cargo loader into a Vexari formation and killed 11 of them before they dragged him from the cab. On the 5th day, the Vexari reached the central dome. Samantha had 200 people left. They were tired and wounded and running out of everything. She gathered them for one last stand. "They will write songs about what we did here," she told them. "They will tell stories about us for 1,000 years. Our children will grow up knowing that when the darkness came, we stood against it. We did not kneel. We did not beg. We fought." The final assault came at midnight. 2,000 Vexari warriors against 200 humans. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the central dome was a ruin filled with bodies from both sides. Samantha Cole was found near the command center. Her rifle was empty and her knife was broken. Around her lay 17 dead Vexari warriors. She had killed them all with her bare hands at the end, grabbing their throats and refusing to let go even as their claws tore into her body. Mars colony fell on the 7th day. But the Vexari had lost 4,000 soldiers taking it. 4,000 of their finest warriors killed by creatures they had dismissed as weak and primitive. High Commander Zelthar read the final casualty report in silence. He had expected to lose perhaps 100 soldiers. He had lost 4,000. The battle had been planned to take hours. It had taken a week. Something cold and unfamiliar settled in his chest. It took him a long moment to recognize what it was, because he had not felt it in many years. It was doubt. "What are these humans?" he asked the empty room. On Earth, the news of Mars reached the population. 20 million people had died. The colony was gone. But the story of the defense spread across the planet. People heard about Samantha Cole and her 300 Marines. They heard about Betty Palmer and Marcus Webb. They heard about ordinary people who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. And something changed. The fear was still there. The grief was overwhelming. But underneath it all, a new feeling began to grow. It was anger. It was defiance. It was the stubborn human refusal to accept the inevitable. General Maria Santos addressed the planet that night. Her voice was steady, and her eyes were hard. They wanted to make an example of Mars. They wanted to show us what happens when we resist, but we saw something different. We saw that they can be hurt. We saw that they can die. The Vexari think they are predators and we are prey. They are wrong. We are not prey. We are humanity, and we have only just begun to fight. The war was no longer about survival. It was about revenge. 6 months had passed since the war began, and humanity was losing. The Vexari had destroyed every orbital station around Earth. They had taken the outer colonies, one by one. 3 billion people were dead, and the survivors lived in fear of what would come next. Every day brought news of another defeat and another million lives lost. Many people began to believe that the end was coming and that nothing could stop it. But something strange was happening in the shadows. Admiral Kevin Grant was 60 years old and had spent his entire life studying war. He had read every book about every conflict in human history. He understood tactics and strategy and the psychology of combat. When the Vexari arrived, he had been ready to retire. Now he worked 20 hours a day in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, trying to find a way to beat an enemy that had never been beaten. For 6 months he had collected every piece of information about the Vexari that he could find. He had studied the data from the starward. He had analyzed footage from every battle. He had interviewed survivors and examined wreckage and read reports until his eyes ached, and slowly he had begun to see something that no one else had noticed. "They do not adapt," he told the War Council one morning. "In 12,000 years they have never changed their tactics. They have never needed to. They win through overwhelming force, and they destroy anyone who resists before that resistance can become a problem. But we are still here. We are still fighting, and they do not know what to do about it." The council members looked at him with tired eyes. They had heard promises before. They had heard plans that failed, and hopes that turned to ash. "What are you suggesting?" General Santos asked. "I am suggesting that we stop trying to fight them the way they expect us to fight. They are stronger than us. They have more ships and more soldiers and better weapons. If we meet them head-on, we will lose every time. So we do not meet them head-on. We find their weaknesses, and we exploit them. We fight a war they have never seen before." For the next 3 months, Kevin worked with the brightest minds humanity had to offer. Scientists and engineers and soldiers came together in secret facilities around the world. They studied everything the Vexari had, and they looked for cracks in the armor. Lieutenant Lisa Park had survived the early days of the war and had been promoted to lead the research team. She remembered the shield frequency gap she had discovered aboard the Starward. Now she dug deeper. "Their shields rotate through 12 frequencies," she explained to Kevin. "There is a gap of 0.3 seconds between each rotation. That is not enough time for a normal weapon to penetrate. But if we time our shots precisely and fire in coordinated bursts, we can hit them during that gap." Kevin nodded. "What else?" "Their sensors have trouble tracking small, fast-moving objects. Our fighters are much smaller than their ships. If we send them in swarms, the Vexari cannot target them all. They will get through." "What about their warriors? Can we beat them on the ground?" A Marine named Sergeant Paul Dixon stepped forward. He had fought at Mars and still carried the scars. "They are stronger than us," he said. "Faster too. But they are predictable. They attack the same way every time. High and fast with those claws. If you know it is coming, you can dodge it. You can use their strength against them, and they do not expect us to get back up when we fall. They have never fought anything that keeps fighting after it should be dead." The training began immediately. Soldiers learned new techniques designed specifically to fight the Vexari. Pilots practiced coordinated attacks in simulators. Engineers built new weapons based on everything they had learned. When Kevin felt they were ready, he chose his target. Titan Station orbited the largest moon of Saturn. The Vexari had taken it 3 months earlier and were using it as a forward base. 200 enemy ships guarded it. Kevin had 63. Every conventional calculation said he would lose. Kevin had no intention of fighting conventionally. The Battle of Titan Station began at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning. The human fleet emerged from behind Saturn and immediately scattered into small groups. The Vexari commander was confused. No enemy had ever split their forces like this. It made no tactical sense. Kevin was counting on that confusion. The human ships dove into the rings of Saturn and used the ice and rock for cover. The Vexari followed, but their larger vessels had trouble navigating the debris. Their formation broke apart as captains tried to chase enemies they could barely see. "Now," Kevin ordered. The human fighters launched in swarms of 50. They were small and fast, and nearly invisible against the chaos of the rings. The Vexari sensors struggled to track them all. Dozens got through and began their coordinated attacks on the shield frequencies. The first Vexari cruiser exploded at 0715. Then another. Then another. Kevin had positioned ships to play dead earlier in the battle. Now they powered up and attacked from behind. The Vexari were caught between enemies on all sides. Their commander tried to rally his forces, but the humans gave him no time to think. The battle lasted 19 hours. When it ended, 147 Vexari ships had been destroyed. Kevin had lost 31 vessels. It was the first major human victory of the war. News of the battle spread across Earth within hours. People who had given up hope began to believe again. Soldiers who had been ready to die began to think they might live. The impossible had happened. The Vexari could be beaten. But the effects reached far beyond Earth. Across the galaxy, other species had been watching the war with growing interest. The Vexari had conquered them long ago, and they had lived in slavery ever since. They had believed that resistance was impossible. They had believed that the Vexari could never be defeated. Now, they saw something different. They saw a young species with primitive technology fighting back against the masters of the galaxy. They saw the mighty Vexari fleet burning in the rings of Saturn, and they began to wonder, if the humans could fight back, then perhaps anyone could. Perhaps the chains that had held them for thousands of years were not as strong as they had believed. Perhaps the time had come to remember what freedom felt like. On the Vexari homeworld, High Commander Zelthar received news of the defeat. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he ordered every available ship to the Sol system. This war would not end until one side was completely destroyed. Zelthar intended to make sure it was not his side. The war entered its second year, and the galaxy was changing. The Vexari still had more ships and more soldiers, but they were no longer winning every battle. Humanity had learned how to fight them, and the lessons were spreading. Every victory gave people hope, and every defeat taught them something new. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Peters was 38 years old, and had been a soldier since he was 18. He led a special operations unit called the Ghost Squadron. His team consisted of 42 soldiers who had been trained for one purpose. They went behind enemy lines and they caused chaos. Ryan had destroyed 17 Vexari supply depots in the past 6 months. He had killed 2 enemy commanders and disabled 4 communications relays. The Vexari had put a bounty on his head that was larger than the budget of some colonies. He considered this a compliment. His next mission took him to a frozen moon called Kyrath 7. Intelligence suggested the Vexari had a listening post there. Ryan was supposed to destroy it and return home. Simple enough. It was not simple at all. The Ghost Squadron landed on the dark side of the moon and made their way toward the target on foot. The temperature was 200 degrees below zero, and the wind cut through their suits like knives. They walked for 6 hours before they reached the ridge overlooking the Vexari base. What Ryan saw made him stop breathing. It was not a listening post. It was a prison camp. Thousands of beings from a dozen different species were held in cages and forced labor units. They were thin and broken and barely alive. The Vexari had been using them as slaves for generations. Sergeant Carol Hayes knelt beside Ryan and looked through her scope. "There must be 2,000 prisoners down there," she said. "Maybe more. And about 800 Vexari guards," Ryan added. He studied the layout of the camp and did the math in his head. 42 soldiers against 800. Those were not good odds. "What are our orders?" Carol asked. Ryan thought about it. His orders were clear. Destroy the listening post and return home. There was no listening post. The mission was over. They could leave right now, and no one would blame them. He looked at the prisoners again. He saw a creature that might have been a child huddled in the corner of a cage. He saw an old being with 6 arms trying to shield others from the cold wind. He saw suffering that had gone on for longer than humanity had existed. "Our orders just changed," he said. "We are getting those people out." Carol stared at him. "Sir, there are 800 guards. We have 42 soldiers and limited ammunition. This is suicide." "Probably," Ryan agreed. "You want to leave them here?" Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No, sir. I do not." The attack began at midnight. Ryan split his team into 4 groups and hit the camp from different directions at the same time. The Vexari were caught by surprise. They had never expected anyone to attack a facility this far behind their lines. The first hour was chaos. The humans moved fast and hit hard, and disappeared before the Vexari could respond. They freed prisoners in small groups and armed those who could fight. The numbers began to even out, but the Vexari recovered quickly. They were warriors who had conquered 1,000 worlds, and they did not panic easily. They formed defensive lines and began to push back. Ryan found himself pinned down near the central command building. 3 of his soldiers were dead, and 2 more were wounded. Vexari warriors were closing in from all sides. Then something unexpected happened. A group of prisoners rushed the Vexari line. They were unarmed and weak, but they did not care. They threw themselves at the guards with bare hands and desperate fury. Most of them died in seconds, but they created an opening. Ryan took it. He led his remaining soldiers through the gap and into the command building. They killed every Vexari inside and took control of the communication system. This is Lieutenant Commander Ryan Peters of the United Earth Navy. He broadcast on every frequency. Kirath 7 is under human control. Any Vexari who surrender will be treated according to the rules of war. Any who continue fighting will die. None of the Vexari surrendered. That was fine with Ryan. He had not expected them to. The battle lasted 3 days. Ryan lost 26 soldiers. The prisoners lost hundreds more who chose to fight rather than stay in chains. But when the sun rose on the 4th day, every Vexari guard was dead, and 2,000 beings were free. They came from 12 different species. Some had been slaves for their entire lives. Some had been born in the camps and had never known freedom. They looked at the humans with eyes that held emotions too complex to name. An old being approached Ryan as the survivors gathered near the landing zone. Its skin was gray and wrinkled and covered with old scars. It spoke in a language Ryan did not understand, but his translator caught the meaning. "Why?" the being asked. "You could have left. You risked everything for us." "Why?" Ryan thought about the question. He thought about his orders and his mission, and all the reasons he should have walked away. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because we could not just leave you here." The old being studied him for a long moment. Then it did something Ryan had never seen a member of its species do. It smiled. Word of Kirath 7 spread across the galaxy like fire. The Vexari tried to suppress the story, but they could not stop it. Everyone heard about the humans who had attacked an impossible target to free slaves they had never met. Everyone heard about the prisoners who had risen up and fought alongside their liberators. Within 3 months, rebellions had erupted on a dozen conquered worlds. Species that had submitted for millennia suddenly remembered what hope felt like. They had seen what the humans did. They had seen that the Vexari could be defied. If the humans could fight back, then so could they. The Vexari Empire found itself at war on multiple fronts for the first time in its history. Their supply lines stretched thin. Their warriors grew tired. Every world they had conquered now had to be guarded against rebellion. Captain Amy Chen commanded the battleship Relentless. She had been fighting since Mars fell, and she had no intention of stopping. Her ship had been rebuilt 3 times, and her crew had been replaced twice, but the name on the hull never changed. She gathered her officers in the briefing room and pointed to a star map that showed the current state of the war. "The Vexari are losing," she said. "They do not know it yet, but they are. Every day they grow weaker, and every day we grow stronger. We do not have to beat them everywhere. We just have to keep fighting. We have to make this war cost more than they can afford to pay." Her officers nodded. They understood. The war was far from over. But for the first time since it began, the humans believed they could win. 3 years had passed since the first Vexari ship appeared near Neptune. The galaxy was no longer the same. The empire that had ruled for 12,000 years was crumbling, and everyone could see it. High Commander Zelthar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human fleet approach his homeworld. They had come so far. These soft creatures, with their short lives and fragile bodies, had done something no species had ever done before. They had brought the war to Vexar Prime, but they had not come alone. Admiral Kevin Grant commanded the combined fleet from the carrier Endurance. 200 human ships flew in formation beside vessels from 17 other species. Races that had been conquered and enslaved for thousands of years had risen up and joined the fight. They had followed the humans across the galaxy to this moment. Kevin looked at the tactical display and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Everything had led to this. Every battle, and every death, and every sacrifice. Mars and Titan, and 100 other worlds. It all came down to what happened in the next few hours. "All ships report ready," his communications officer announced. Kevin nodded. "Tell the fleet to remember why we are here. Remember Mars. Remember everyone we lost. Remember what we are fighting for." The Vexari fleet numbered over 1,000 ships. They had gathered every vessel they had to defend their homeworld. It was the largest force they had ever assembled. And it should have been enough to crush any enemy. But the humans had learned things about war that the Vexari had never needed to know. They had learned that strength was not just about numbers. It was about will and creativity, and the refusal to accept defeat. The battle began at dawn. The two fleets met in the space above Vexar Prime, and the sky itself seemed to burn. Weapons fire lit up the darkness like 1,000 suns. Ships exploded and debris scattered in all directions. The noise of battle filled every frequency, and the screams of the dying echoed across the void. Kevin moved his ships in patterns the Vexari had never seen. He used the gravity of nearby moons to slingshot his vessels into unexpected positions. He sent waves of fighters to overwhelm enemy defenses, while his larger ships struck at critical targets. The Vexari fought back with everything they had. They were still dangerous, and they still had numbers on their side. For every ship they lost, they destroyed 2 of the coalition vessels. But the humans kept coming. The rebels kept coming. No one ran away. Hour after hour the battle raged. The casualty reports grew longer, and the debris field grew thicker. Kevin watched ships he had commanded for years disappear in flashes of light. He watched friends die and strangers sacrifice themselves for a cause they believed in. And slowly the tide began to turn. High Commander Zelthar saw his fleet being destroyed piece by piece, and he made a decision. If he could not win the battle, he would cut off the head of the enemy. He ordered his personal guard to board the Endurance and kill Admiral Grant. 10,000 Vexari warriors launched from the flagship in boarding pods. They were the finest soldiers the Empire had ever produced. Each one had been bred for war and trained since birth to kill. They had never failed a mission. The pods slammed into the hull of the Endurance, and the warriors poured out with claws ready and battle cries echoing through the corridors. They expected to find frightened humans hiding behind locked doors. Master Sergeant Nick Brennan was waiting for them. Nick was 53 years old and had been fighting since he was 17. He had shrapnel in his left leg from a battle 2 years earlier, and he had not slept in 30 hours. None of that mattered. When the first Vexari came through the breach, Nick put a bullet between its eyes and started moving. "Hold the line," he told his Marines. "They do not get past us." The battle for Deck 7 lasted 4 hours. The Vexari came in waves, and the Marines cut them down. When their rifles overheated, they used pistols. When their pistols ran dry, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. Nick killed more Vexari that day than any human had ever killed in a single battle. He fought with a fury that terrified even his own soldiers. Every time a warrior knocked him down, he got back up. Every time he was wounded, he kept fighting. The Vexari had never seen anything like it. They did not understand. Humans were supposed to be weak. Humans were supposed to break. But this one would not break. None of them would break. The final Vexari assault came at the 6-hour mark. 200 warriors rushed the barricade in a desperate attempt to push through. Nick stepped into their path with nothing but a captured Vexari blade, and a look in his eyes that made even the enemy hesitate. He killed 17 of them before they brought him down. Even then, he did not stop. He grabbed the throat of the last warrior standing and squeezed with every ounce of strength he had left. They found him like that when the battle ended. His hand was still locked around the enemy's neck, and both of them were dead. Above Vexar Prime, the battle reached its conclusion. The Vexari fleet was broken. 2/3 of their ships had been destroyed, and the rest were fleeing into deep space. The coalition had won. 3 days later, High Commander Zelthar signed the surrender documents aboard the Endurance. He had ruled the Vexari for 200 years, and had never known defeat. Now he stood before creatures he had once dismissed as insects, and accepted terms of unconditional surrender. Kevin Grant watched him sign, and felt nothing. Too many people had died. Too much had been lost. Victory did not feel like celebration. It felt like exhaustion. In the weeks that followed, the Vexari Empire collapsed completely. The conquered species declared their independence, and the masters who had ruled them scattered into the darkness. An age of tyranny that had lasted 12,000 years came to an end. A Vexari historian named Kethel was tasked with recording what had happened. He spent years studying the war and trying to understand how his people had lost. His final entry became famous across the galaxy. We believed ourselves to be the apex predators of the cosmos. We had conquered all who stood before us. We had never known defeat. Then we found Earth. Then we found humanity. We thought their small bodies and short lives made them weak. We were wrong. They are not weak. They are relentless. They are creative. They are utterly unwilling to accept defeat. They will sacrifice everything for those they love and for causes they believe in. They turned our own conquered subjects against us. They learned our weaknesses and exploited them. They fought us in the darkness of space and on the surfaces of 100 worlds, and they never stopped. Let this record stand as a warning to any who might come after. Let it be known throughout the stars for as long as stars burn. Never start a war with humans. You will not win. You will only learn how terrible it is to face a species that refuses to be broken. The document was translated into every language in the galaxy. It was carved into monuments and taught in schools and passed down through generations, and humanity spread across the stars, carrying with them the memory of all those who had fallen. They built new worlds and forged new alliances and created a future that no one had thought possible. They never forgot what they had been through. They never forgot what they had lost. But most importantly, they never forgot what they had proven. That no matter how dark things seemed, and no matter how powerful the enemy appeared, there was always hope. There was always a chance. And there would always be those willing to fight for it. The end.